Oh, gosh, I have to go to the gym. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We are absolutely honored to have Dr. Stallman here today. He's a man who doesn't really need an introduction because he can really speak for himself. So I just want to quickly thank the Cooper Union for hosting us, and I have a note that Jaron Lanier, what is it? That's who. Jaron Lanier will be speaking here Friday, March 7th at 6:30. So. Oh, and thanks to David Greenstein, right. So thank you very much. All right. Well, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stallman.
Well, Jaron Lanier published a book in which he rebuked me for wasting my effort on trying to give people freedom when I could have been advancing technology, which shows a big difference in values between him and me. Anyway, I have some requests for you. Oh, first of all, some of you will be hidden behind a pillar if you don't move. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do to avoid that. No matter where I stand, somebody's going to be hidden behind a pillar. That's the way this place is built. So, some requests. First of all, if you take a photo of me, don't put it in Facebook or Instagram. No photos of me in Facebook or Instagram. That company is a monstrous surveillance engine. It does surveillance on its useds, and it does surveillance on its non-useds as well. So of course you shouldn't be a used of Facebook, but that's not enough to protect you. If you put the photo of somebody in Facebook, you give Facebook one more way to surveil that person and track that person. We can dispute whether putting the photo of your friend in Facebook is a decent way to treat a friend. But if we're not friends, that doesn't affect me. However, putting photos of me in Facebook hurts me whether I'm your friend or not. So please don't do that. Second, if you make a recording, audio or video of this talk and you want to distribute copies, please do so only in the formats that are friendly to free software. Those are the OGG formats or WebM. Especially, don't distribute it through a site that uses Flash. So, for instance, not in YouTube. And also, especially not in Windows Media Player or QuickTime. Don't put it in iTunes, because iTunes requires non-free software to access it. Make sure that whatever site you're using to distribute the video or audio does not require running any non-free software, including non-free JavaScript software, for normal access to the site to download the recording. So, not in YouTube. And please put on the recording the Creative Commons No Derivatives license, because this is a presentation of a point of view. I'd like to mention also that we still have a few shirts and books and lots of buttons and pins and metal stickers, metal stickers like this one that say gnu+linux inside, that you can buy and put on your computer. There may also be some of the gratis ordinary stickers left. There are many kinds of stickers, and you can take as many as you can put to good use, because they're here to be used. Don't put it on your clothing today, because then it won't last for more than a couple of hours, which is a waste of a good sticker. It could be visible for months if you put it in a permanent place. So, you will hear about many activities that aim for digital inclusion or to close the digital divide. And these activities take for granted that using digital technology is good and that we should try to get everybody using digital technology. I disagree. Using digital technology could be good or bad, depending on whether the digital society you're included in is just or unjust. If it's an unjust digital society, then the right goal is digital extraction of its victims, not digital inclusion of more victims. So what makes digital society just or unjust? I'm going to discuss 10 different threats to the freedom of users of digital technology. 10 different threats more generally to our freedom in a digital society, and say something about what we can do about these threats. First, there is surveillance. Now, there is surveillance by companies like Facebook and Google, and there's surveillance by states. But as Julian Assange often points out, they're really two sides of the same thing, because all the data that is accumulated by the companies becomes available to the states. So business surveillance of people is a part of state surveillance of people. The surveillance is often done through people's own digital devices, especially if they're running non-free software, which means software that the users have no control over, software controlled by the company. Well, often they are spyware. They snoop on the user and transmit data to some server. Examples of proprietary programs that you've heard of probably that are spyware include Microsoft Windows, iOS, the software of the iThings, Flash Player, Angry Birds, the Amazon Swindle software, and nearly all portable phones. Well, when the spying is done through our own devices, we can block it if we insist on using only free software. Free software which is controlled by the users, and the users can make it not snoop on us. So this is one area where we can block the mistreatment by our own actions. But this is not, through your own devices is not the only way they snoop on you. They also do it through systems that you use that don't belong to you. For instance, systems of the phone company or the ISP. Now, you use those to communicate, but they don't belong to you, so you can't fix them by having control over the software in them. They're not your computers, but they can spy on your communications. The ISPs will make lists of all the sites you communicate with. The phone company will make lists of all the phone calls to give to the NSA. And if it's a mobile phone, it'll record your movements as well. So, we can't prevent all these forms of surveillance by our own individual actions. To stop that kind of surveillance, we have to politically organize. And then there's the surveillance that's done through other systems that exist only to surveil people, like microphones and lampposts. They sell lampposts with microphones. Microphones on buses. The buses in San Francisco have microphones in them to listen to the passengers. Taxis in New York City are required to have cameras to take a photo of the passenger when the passenger gets in and sends it by radio to the New York Thug Department. Well, this can only be considered a surveillance system. They're up to no good. They shouldn't be doing this. So I won't take taxis in New York City anymore. Well, then there are the license plate recognizers that keep track of the movements of cars. There are too many of them in the US, but it's even worse in England, where they have so many that they track all car travel. This was announced 10 years ago, that the UK government was tracking all car travel. They can make databases and find out where a given car went on a certain day 5 years ago, and they can track any car in real time. And now, thanks to Edward Snowden, we know that the US government and the UK government and other governments that work together with them are collecting all the data they can get, and that they're using it for many unjustifiable purposes. 3 cheers for Edward Snowden. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! The level of surveillance that we have in the US today far exceeds what Stalin was able to do. And it's so much that it precludes democracy. You see, the state is essential for many vital jobs, like providing food and clothing and shelter and health care and education to people, like building roads, like funding scientific research, like inspecting the meat and other products to make sure it's not going to poison us, and so many jobs. We absolutely need to have a state. But the state is so powerful that it's also dangerous if it gets out of our control and stops respecting people's rights. It can do more damage than anything else in the world. It's far more dangerous than any underground terrorist group. I mean, just consider, non-state affiliated terrorists killed about 3,000 Americans, and then Bush killed 4,500 Americans by sending them to conquer and occupy Iraq. And that's not to mention 500,000 Iraqis. So which is more dangerous? The state's more dangerous. So we need to maintain our democratic and constitutional control over the state so that it doesn't run amok. But in order to maintain control over the state, we need to know what it's doing. That's difficult when the state starts doing more and more things secretly, including assassinating people. And spying on people. So how do we find out what the state's doing? We need whistleblowers. There's a famous question, who watches the watchman? Now we know the answer. Whistleblowers watch the watchman. But the state has a practice of labeling whistleblowers as criminals or fishing through their lives for something to prosecute them for. It's very, very dangerous to be a whistleblower if the state finds out who you are. When the state can find the whistleblowers, only a great hero like a Snowden dares to be a whistleblower. And there are not going to be enough such heroes. So, we can now establish the absolute limit on the level of surveillance in a democracy. If it's enough to find whistleblowers with fairly good reliability, that's too much. Then people won't dare to tell us what the state is doing, and we have no real control. A whistleblower was recently sentenced to prison. They found him by collecting the phone records of around 100 people who work for the Associated Press. What this shows is, if the state can always tell who spoke with a journalist, it can find the whistleblowers, and democracy is in danger. We must reduce the level of general surveillance to the point where the state usually can't tell who spoke with a journalist. We must We must do this in a way that is robust. We could do it by laws to protect whistleblowers, but if the state ever finds an excuse to ignore them, that wouldn't do any good. We could try to do it with laws limiting access to these massive databases. But pursuing a criminal will always count as justification, so once they label the whistleblower as a criminal, they've got the justification they need. They can find the whistleblower, democracy is sunk. So, those are not enough. When data is collected, it will be misused, both for unjust public ends and for unjust private ends. So, what we need to protect democracy from surveillance is to redesign all the digital systems so they stop collecting data about people. So they stop building digital dossiers about everyone. Remember, standard practice is to label dissidents as terrorists and then use so-called anti-terrorist legislation to attack dissidents. They are doing this in Egypt. They're doing this in the US. While there were people who dropped a banner in Texas, and a little bit of the glitter dropped off the banner, so they were accused of planning a terrorist hoax. I didn't know that Putin had become governor of Texas, but apparently so, because that's just the sort of thing that people sneer at him for doing. But as an American who loves his country, it hurts me more when this happens in the United States. So, we must recognize that these measures that supposedly are to make us safe actually put us in the biggest kind of danger of all. We must organize to legally require the redesign of these systems so that they don't put our privacy and our journalism and our democracy in danger. For my technical solutions, and I've got a long list of solutions, look at gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance vs democracy.html. By the way, could someone get me some water? I'd appreciate that. Tap water is fine. Bottled water in the US is waste. Yes. Oh, it's tea. Have you been drinking from it? What? I can't hear you. Well, I don't look, there's some things I don't like sharing, like germs. And I've got a bunch of germs I don't want to share with you right now. If anyone speaks German, maybe you could ask these germs to leave me alone. I could drink that, but if you get a cup, then someone else can drink what I don't drink. And by the way, that system to track all cars in the UK has already been used to sabotage democracy. Some suspected protesters on the way to a protest were grabbed by the authorities and stopped from going to the protest until it was over. Their car had been tracked using that system. So, sabotage of democracy, that's what it is. If they can use it to attack democracy, they will. So, the next threat to our freedom in the digital society comes from censorship. 15 years ago, we thought that the internet would crush censorship, that it would be too hard to censor the internet. Now we know that any country can censor the internet if it's willing to pay a price in money and hatred from the public. And this is not limited to obvious tyrannies such as China and Iran. It's also done in Finland, which likes to claim it's a free country. But in 2006, Finland imposed filters on the internet. They said they would block things like pornography. Somebody did an experiment. He just got a list of sites to see which ones were blocked and posted the list of sites that were blocked. This is journalism. Then they blocked his site. He went to court. After all, the law didn't say that sites doing journalism about censorship should be blocked. They blocked his site, and eventually, a few months ago, the Supreme Court of Finland ruled that in favor of blocking access to his site. It's only blocked in Finland. You could access it from here. So basically, the people who are not allowed to see what's blocked in Finland are the victims of censorship in Finland. Now, he hasn't bothered to update the site. For him, the legal battle about permission to publish such information in Finland was more important. And freedom lost, censorship won. Many countries in Europe have filters imposed on the internet. But the worst censorship system in Europe I know of is that of the UK. The UK has announced it will impose mandatory filters on lots of kinds of sites, including political sites. But then most people suffer from blockage of even more. It's the default now that they block access to pornography as well. If you have your own private internet connection, you can ask them to take off that blockage. But if you depend on public access sites, you have no escape from that censorship. So the UK is now the land of censorship. Turkey also is similar, except in Turkey they had protests on the street recently. Thousands of people protesting against internet censorship. Well, bravo for Turks who care about freedom, but so far they're losing. Australia does not have mandatory filters. That proposal was defeated politically, but Australia has censorship of links. It's forbidden to link to certain sites. Electronic Frontier Australia was ordered to remove a link to a foreign political website on pain of being fined $11,000 a day. And what was this site? Was it a terrorist site? No. It was something almost as disgusting. It was an anti-abortion rights website. But they have the right to present their views, including in Australia. In some countries, things can be removed from the internet without even a court order. For instance, France, Spain, Italy, India. In India, things can be removed very easily. If something is considered to offend anybody's religious sensibilities, it can be removed without a trial just for that. And then in the United States, they can seize a domain name, which doesn't take the site itself off the internet, but blocks most people from accessing it in the obvious way. And then if the owners of the site don't like that, they can go to court. Maybe in a year they'll get their domain back. Punishment. So it's basically guilty until proven innocent. Should be unconstitutional. So, can anyone find a cup or something for me, please? By the way, you should see how they deliver this. They use photo sticks, which is why it's called pole and spring water. So, for a long time, the all-purpose purpose excuse for censorship was child pornography. In fact, a representative of the IFPI, the World Organization of Record Companies, said in an international meeting that child pornography is the ideal excuse to get filters imposed on the internet in order to apply those filters to what they really wanted to block, which is sharing. But nowadays, the copyright industry is getting so bold and arrogant that it comes right out and asks countries to impose laws to filter sites used for sharing. The next threat to our freedom comes from data formats that restrict users. Sometimes it's because they're secret. In this case, we refer to it as digital handcuffs. The idea is that the format is secret, and therefore only a secret proprietary program knows how to operate on the format. And since you don't know the format, you can't write any other program to do it. Some applications save the user's data in secret formats to make the user essentially a prisoner of that program. In addition, they use secret formats for distribution of copies of published works. In this case, it's often known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management. And you find this on videos, on music, on books. And of course, it's always implemented with non-free software, because the purpose of that software is to mistreat the users. If the users were free to fix it, they would fix it so it didn't mistreat them. So they're always attacking your freedom at two levels at once. The basic attack is it's not free software. And the secondary attack is it's designed to mistreat you. We know of digital handcuffs in Microsoft Windows, in Mac OS, in the software of the iThings, in the software of the Amazon Swindle. Thank you. And in Google Play, which is the program to access Google's App Store. There are also data formats that are not secret, but they attack our freedom in another way because they're patented. Now, typically, there is free software to access those formats, but many distributors don't dare to include that software because they're afraid they'll be sued. Oh, doesn't rain in pours. By the way, is there any chance of getting me some hot tea? Because I've got a cold and it helps to drink hot tea. So, now, this is the problem with MP3 and MPEG-4. They're patented, and some gnu+linux distributions don't have software to handle those formats. So what happens? Somebody installs one of those distros and then gets a file like that and tries to play it, and what do you know, it doesn't work, which makes us look bad. And they say, well, this system's no good, it can't play these files. So that's why I ask you not to distribute my speeches in those formats. Because everything that's distributed in those formats increases the problem. So I never generate those those formats from anything. Oh, thank you. And then there's the peculiar case of Flash. Flash, aside from one particular digital handcuffs feature, is not secret, and it's not patented. But Adobe keeps changing it. So, in fact, they say it's a new version, and in fact what they did is they redesigned it completely from zero. It's totally different from the previous version. And as a result, we haven't been able to catch up. So the use of Flash in a website is very bad for free software. Please make sure your website doesn't use Flash. The next threat to our freedom in the digital society comes from proprietary, non-free software. Software that the users don't control. Software that, because free software is software that respects the user's freedom and community. Software that the users control. With software, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other. There's no getting away from it. No other way. In order for the users to control the program, they need the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish, for any purpose, including business, by the way, because business is a legitimate part of life. We have to regulate it very carefully to make sure businesses don't mistreat us, but we do want to have businesses. And so you've got to be free to use the program, including in your business. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code of the program and change it to make the program function for you the way you wish. With these two freedoms, each user separately has control over the program. Each person or organization has control over the program for itself. But that's not enough. For one thing, most users don't know how to program. Most users don't know how to study and change source code. If they were limited to doing this for themselves, it wouldn't be adequate to give them any control. So we need collective control too. Collective control means that any group of users are free to work together to exercise control over this program. Now, some of the people in the group will be programmers, but there could be lots of others in the group, and they could decide what to do and do it. This requires 2 more essential freedoms. Freedom 2 is the freedom to make exact copies and distribute them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to make copies of your modified versions and distribute them to others when you wish. This permits the members of any group to cooperate, and also to offer the group's version to the public. And you can make use of both of these kinds of control at once. You can be working with others in a group that adapts the program for what the people in the group want, and then you can adapt it some more for what you want. Or you can pay a programmer to do it for you, because the 4 freedoms permit that also. So, when the users have the 4 freedoms, the users control the program, which is the way it should be. But if the users don't have the 4 freedoms, then they don't control the program, which means the program controls the users. And the owner, or developer, controls the program. So what do we have? We have a system of unjust power. This non-free program is an instrument giving the owner power over the users. And this should never be. There should never be any non-free software, because nobody should have this power over people through the software they're using. Well, the mere fact that the owner has this kind of power is already an injustice. But nowadays, they generally see this power as an opportunity to mistreat the users in other ways, which is further injustice, compounding the felony, you might say. 30 years ago, when I started the free software movement, that was not so. The developer might have power over you through a non-free program, but at least you could expect that the developers would honestly try to make the program function in a way that the users would like. Not anymore. Nowadays, it's standard practice to make these programs malware. So let's make the distinction clear. Malware means a program whose technical functioning is designed to mistreat users. So a non-free program is inherently an injustice, but it's not inherently malware. It might have been written to try to please and serve the users, but nowadays, that's very unlikely. Nowadays, malicious functionalities are the usual case. The ethical standards have sunk. Most people who use proprietary software are using known proprietary malware. And to prove this, well, I already gave you an example of programs. Oh, good. Can you open these? Because it's hard work for me to open. Could you come up and open them, please? You know, you gotta make them with hot water, but then it's gotta cool off so you can drink it. It must be too hot to drink right now. Thanks. So I will try to distract myself from them and continue with my speech. So open this one too, please. Okay, I don't want to think about that. Thanks for later. So I've already told you about examples of spyware and digital handcuffs. There's a third kind of malicious functionality. Oh, pour some more of that into this, please. Pour some water. No. Pour some water into that glass. I'll take the tea bags out, please. It'll be too strong. Fortunately, you've got something to put in. I'm not in favor of open source. I never agree with open source. I have nothing to do with open source. That's a mistake. Misinformation that you have been given. Please do not associate me or my work with the term open source, and I'll tell you in a few minutes why. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, there's a third kind of malicious functionality, backdoors, which means the program receives commands from somebody else to do something to the user that the user might not like, but it doesn't ask permission, and usually it doesn't tell the user. So let me give you a rundown on malicious functionalities. Microsoft Windows has spy functionalities, digital handcuffs, and a universal backdoor. A universal backdoor means that Microsoft has the power to remotely change the code. It can remotely install any change at all, which means that it can do absolutely anything to the user. Any malicious functionality that is not in Windows today could be installed remotely by force tomorrow. So Windows is malware. macOS is malware because it has digital handcuffs. But iOS, the software of the I things, is far worse. It has spy functionalities. It has an acknowledged backdoor which can be used to delete apps. But the worst thing is the digital handcuffs, which are the tightest ever. Apple was the pioneer in tightening digital handcuffs to impose its control over installation of application programs. The iThings are a platform for censorship. The user is not free to install whatever program she wishes. She's only allowed to install the apps approved by Apple from the App Store. And Apple practices censorship in an arbitrary fashion. Just a few weeks ago, Apple deleted all the Bitcoin wallets. It's not clear why, but Apple doesn't have to account to anyone. Designing general purpose computers as a platform for censorship should be illegal. It should be forbidden as a matter of defending people's freedom. Now, if you feel like only installing programs from so-and-so's app store, you should be free to do that, and free not to do that. Disconcerting to have these cups on a slant on something that tips back and forth. You know, I expect something bad to happen at any moment. So, Flash Player has a surveillance functionality and digital handcuffs. Angry Birds is a spyware. It transmits geolocation data. The Amazon Swindle has all three kinds. First of all, it spies on the user. They can actually see which page of which book is being looked at any time. And if the user enters any notes, they can get the notes. And of course, they know which books the machine has, which is already too much, because you've got to be free to buy books anonymously, paying cash. It threatens human rights to know what books somebody's reading. And of course, under the USA Patent Riot Act, the government can collect all that data about what books people have read at any time without a court order. Then there's the freedom, by the way, the traditional freedom of readers to give the book to somebody else after you read it, or to lend it to various people, or sell it to a used bookstore, which Amazon abolishes using digital handcuffs. The software blocks people from doing this. Well, that digital handcuffs should be illegal also. And in addition, Amazon doesn't respect private property, because Amazon says you can't own a book, not if it's in the swindle. Amazon says you could only lease the book to read it under Amazon's choice of conditions. And then there's the freedom to keep the book as long as you wish, which Amazon abolishes with a back door, which can be used to delete books. We know about it because in 2009, Amazon remotely deleted thousands of copies of a particular book. This was an Orwellian act, and what was the book? It was 1984 by George Orwell. There was a lot of criticism, so Amazon promised it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. Yeah, not very comforting if you've read 1984, but don't worry, Amazon doesn't keep the promise anyway. So that's why I call it the swindle. Its purpose is it's designed so that it swindles readers out of the traditional freedoms of books. But its official name is the Kindle. Kindle means to start a fire, which is perhaps meant to suggest that its real purpose is virtual remote book burning. Keep in mind that using the swindle makes you antisocial, because it means you can stop lending books to your friends. If your friends start using the swindle, they will be antisocial. Warn them before they fall into this trap. Warn them that if they started reading books on the swindle, it would mean putting an end to their friendship with you and everyone else who reads. Because if they don't realize how bad it would be, they might just buy one or accept one as a gift, and then they think, I got it, how could I not use it? and then they find themselves breaking off their friendships. Don't let them blindly go down that path. Warn them so they can avoid it. And my last example is most portable phones. They've got a surveillance feature which transmits the GPS data on request, remote request, and they have a universal backdoor that can be used to convert them remotely into listening devices. And once they're converted, they listen all the time and they transmit all the time. And you don't have to talk into the microphone to be listened to. They can listen from across the room. And if you think you can get some, if you think of switching it off to get some privacy, that doesn't work because they pretend to switch off, but they really keep listening and transmitting. The only way to get privacy is to remove all the batteries. And it may not be obvious how to remove all the batteries. There may be one obvious battery you can remove and another battery inside that you can't remove. And some don't let you remove any of the batteries. I wonder why. So, this is why I don't have a portable phone. I believe it's my duty as a citizen to refuse to carry a portable tracking and surveillance device. Because it's my duty to stick a finger in Big Brother's eye. And it's your duty too, but I don't decide for you, I only decide for me. Anyway, I've just given you a list of proprietary programs that are used by most of the people that use proprietary programs. And these programs are known to be malware. So I proved that most users of proprietary software are using known malware. But what about all the other proprietary software without Freedom 1? We can't check the source code. We don't know if it's malicious. Occasionally we can find out, yes, this program is malicious. And then there are the others where we just don't know. And we can't find out. Those programs demand blind faith. Proprietary software is software for suckers. You should know better than to think you're not being kicked by the developers of those programs. But why is this? It's because they have power over the users and they know it. And that power tempts them to use that power to gain further advantage over those people. They see some way they will profit by mistreating the users, so they do. The idea that you should have scruples against this is gone. But what about free software? Well, the developers of free software, the contributors to free software, we don't have power over the users. The users control the program. If they don't like a change we put in, they can take it out. And since we know we don't have power, we don't face this temptation. We know that the users can protect themselves from any hypothetical nastiness in a free program. And as a result, we don't think we'll get away with it, so we don't face much temptation to try. And that's even if you assume that we are no more ethical than the proprietary software developers are. But I think that the habits of our community lead to most of the people in it being ethical and not even wanting to mistreat other people. But if someone does, the users of free software have a defense. It's not perfect. No perfect defense is known. But this is the only defense known. The only known defense against malware put in by a software developer is it's got to be free software. And this is why malicious functionality in free software is rare, whereas in proprietary software it's the most common case. Now, I started the free software movement in 1983. I wanted to make it possible to use a computer in freedom. The computer won't do anything without an operating system. And in 1983, the operating systems for modern computers had already become proprietary. So if you bought a new computer, to make it any use, you had to have an operating system installed, and there went your freedom. I realized that since I was an operating system developer, I had a chance to do something about this. All I had to do was develop an operating system. Then, as its author, I could legally make it free software, and then people would be able to use computers in freedom by running my system in them. In other words, I had a chance to rescue people from the injustice of proprietary software by doing technical work in my own field. Now, most people didn't recognize proprietary software as an injustice. I had the skills necessary to try to rescue people, and it looked like nobody else would try, if not me. That meant I had been elected by circumstances to do this job. It was my duty. It's as if you see somebody drowning, and you know how to swim, and there's no one else around, and it's not Bush. You have a duty to save this person. Well, maybe that statement is too strong. We might identify some other people about whom I should not affirm a moral duty to save them, such as Cheney and Rumsfeld and Ashcroft and Bush's torturers and the people that protect Bush's torturers, such as Obama, and who knows how many more. But fortunately, I don't have to resolve all these questions because I don't know how to swim. But in real life, the job I had to do was not swimming, it was writing lots of code. I knew how to do that, so I decided to develop a system that would be entirely made of free software. Every piece would be free software. Because if one piece is non-free software, that piece attacks the user's freedom. In order for the system as a whole to respect the user's freedom, every piece must respect the user's freedom. And that was the goal. Then I decided to recruit others to help develop it to get it done sooner. Then I decided to make a Unix-like system compatible with Unix. Because Unix was a proprietary operating system with some technical advantages, and it was popular. Since it was proprietary, we couldn't use Unix and be free. But making my system Unix-like was advantageous. It meant all the Unix users would be able to switch very easily. They would already know how to run my system. It would run just like Unix. And then I gave it the name GNU, which is a joke. GNU, because that's the hacker spirit. Ha ha, only serious. This project was the most serious thing I could possibly do. It was meant to give freedom to users of computing. But that's no reason not to give it a name that's a joke. GNU is a recursive acronym. It stands for GNU's Not Unix. GNU, GNU's Not Unix. And that was a tradition in my community. When you make a system or program that's similar to some existing program, one way to give credit is to give it a recursive acronym name saying this one's not the other one. So after I developed the first Emacs extensible text editor, there were 30 imitations of Emacs, and some of them were called this or that Emacs, which is clear but not very funny. So one was called Fine, for Fine is not Emacs. And then there was Sign, for Sign is not Emacs. And Ina, for Ina is not Emacs. And Mince, for Mince is not complete Emacs. And version 2 of Ina was called Zwei, for Zwei was Ina initially. So of course I wanted to have a recursive acronym name, and when I discovered that the word GNU would work, well, GNU is the most humor-charged word in the English language, used in countless wordplays because according to the dictionary, the G is silent and it's pronounced new. So, anytime you want to write the word new, instead of writing N-E-W, you can write G-N-U and you've got a joke. Perhaps not a very good joke, but there are lots of them. So we've learned to associate this word with laughter. But, of course, this word is the name of this animal that lives in Africa. So this is an adorable GNU that needs a home. So anyway, when it's the name of our system, please do not follow the dictionary. Because if you say the new operating system, you're already mistaken. We've been working on it for 30 years, and we've been using it for 22 years, so it's not new anymore. But it still is GNU, and will always be GNU. So please say it's the GNU operating system. There's another erroneous pronunciation you need to avoid, which sounds like Linux. Strange to say, millions of people, when they talk about the GNU system, call it Linux, which means they don't give us any of the credit for the system that we principally developed, and that's not nice. But how did this confusion start? In 1992, we had almost all the system, but one major essential component was still missing. That was the kernel. The kernel is the component of a system that allocates the machine's resources to all the other programs you run. In that year, Mr. Torvalds, who had written a proprietary kernel called Linux, liberated it. He made it free software. So, the combination of the almost complete GNU system plus Linux made a complete free system, which was basically the GNU system, but contained Linux also. So an appropriate name for it, a fitting name, would be GNU plus Linux, or GNU/Linux. And that's what you should call it. Because if you call the whole thing Linux, you're attributing our large work to someone else who started later and did less, and that's... It's not right. You should give us at least equal mention, and that's all we ask. But what makes this an especial problem is that Mr. Torvalds doesn't agree with the ethical ideals of the free software movement. All of what I've told you so far, he would reject. And he has a right to his views and to promote them. But he doesn't, because he says he's happy to use proprietary software as long as it's powerful and reliable. Well, he's got a right to his views, but he doesn't have a right to use our work as a platform to promote his views, opposing the ideals that motivated us to do our work. But that's exactly what happens when people attribute our work to him. And the reason they do this is because people talk about the GNU system and they call it Linux. So, and they heard that Linux was written by Mr. Torvalds, and they put 2 and 2i together to make 4, which is not true. It's 2 plus 2i. But but they don't know any better because they've been misled by the people who talk about the whole system and call it Linux. So please stop misleading them. When you're talking about Torvalds' kernel, you should call it Linux, because he wrote that and that's the name he gave it. But when you're talking about our system plus Torvalds' kernel, please use the name we gave it and call it GNU plus Linux. Now, freedom is frequently threatened. To keep it, you've got to defend it. To defend it, you have to value it. And to value it, you have to understand the concept. Unfortunately, most people have never considered the idea that in using a program, you deserve certain human rights. Because most people started using computing with proprietary software. And everyone they knew was using proprietary software. They didn't know there could be another way. So they took for granted that proprietary software was a legitimate way for things to be done, which required them to let the proprietary developers dictate the answer to the question, what human rights do you deserve in using a program? And the proprietary developers dictated the answer, essentially none at all. That they can impose any conditions they like. So we, in the free software movement, are trying to start this debate. We believe we've identified 4 human rights that the user of a program always deserves. These are the 4 freedoms that define free software. But when we try to bring these ideas to the attention of the public, we encounter 2 obstacles. First, the users of the GNU system don't know it's the GNU system. They think it's Linux, and that it was started by Mr. Torvalds. And they think we're just a fringe group of fanatics. They don't realize that the system they use exists because of our ideals. So they dismiss us without even considering. After all, they know the system comes from the ideals of Mr. Torvalds, from the philosophy of Mr. Torvalds. And they know what it is, so they follow him. But if they knew that the system they're using is really more GNU than Linux, and that it exists because of our campaign for freedom, they might pay attention when we try to convince them that they deserve freedom and they should fight for it. And with them fighting for freedom, we might win. Then the other obstacle is the term, quote, open source, unquote. See, after the free software movement had been going for 14 years, in 1998, and had achieved a certain amount of momentum, there were people in the community who distributed and used and developed free software but rejected our ideals. So they thought it was nice to have free software, but they refused to criticize proprietary software on ethical grounds. And in 1998, they invented the term open source so they could have a way of talking about free software without alluding to freedom, without raising it as a matter of right or wrong. With their new term, they could construct a different discourse, which didn't refer to ethical issues at all, which presented it solely as a matter of how to optimize certain practical benefits. And since they were the majority, they tried to drown us out. They didn't completely succeed because we free software activists, and there are thousands of us, continue talking about it and spreading the idea. But most people mistakenly believe we're in favor of open source. Every week I get messages from people, several of them, saying they appreciate what I've done for open source. I mean, it's horrible. They've completely got it wrong, what I'm trying to do. So I write to them and say, I think you've been misinformed. I was never in favor of open source. That's the slogan of people who reject my views. I launched the free software movement. Here you can read about the difference in gnu.org/philosophy/open source misses the point.html. And I got so fed up with giving speeches and seeing that they were being publicized by talking about open source that I started to give instructions to the people organizing my speeches saying, don't mention the word open in connection with my talk. And I see articles from time to time that call me the father of open source. So I send a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. Then I explain what the free software movement stands for. I present the ideas that were missing from the article, and that, of course, is the important point of the letter, but I like starting with a joke anyway. And besides, maybe that convinces them to print my letter. Well, I do my best, but I need your help. You can strengthen the free software movement just by saying free or Libre software and not saying open source. The less you talk about open anything, the more you help us. Talk about free rather than open. These are two different ideas based on different values, and they are rivals for mind share. So just by talking about freedom rather than openness, you strengthen our campaign. So the last thing I want to mention about free software is that schools should teach exclusively free software. And this is not just to save money. That's a secondary side benefit. This is not about how to make education a little better. This is about how to do good education instead of bad education. Because teaching people to use a proprietary program is implanting dependence. That's bad education. It must never be done. Schools have a social mission. And by schools, I include adult education as well, all educational activities. The social mission is to educate good citizens of a strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free society. And in computing, that means graduating skilled users of free software ready to take their place in a free digital society. Why do some proprietary developers offer gratis copies or discounted cheap copies of their non-free software to the schools? The same reason drug traffickers offer gratis first dose. They want to get people hooked. They want to implant dependence. So for a school to hand out Windows or iThings is like handing out tobacco and whiskey. But there's a deeper reason, for the sake of the education of the best programmers. Some people have a natural talent. Typically between 10 and 13, they become fascinated with programming. If they use a program, they want to know how it works. But when they ask the teacher, how does he do this? If the program is proprietary, he can only respond, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to know, it's a secret. So education is forbidden. A proprietary program is the enemy of the spirit of education. So it must not be tolerated in a school. But if the program is free, the teacher can explain as much as he knows and then give each of these kids a copy of the source code saying, read it and you'll understand everything. And those kids will be thrilled by the chance to understand everything. They're fascinated with programming. And the teacher can say, if you find any part you can't figure out by yourself, show it to me and we'll figure it out together. So that gives our natural-born programmers the chance to learn a vital lesson. That part of the code is badly written, it's not clear. Don't write code that way. Because how do they advance from natural-born programmers to good programmers? They need to learn how to write good, clear code, which means they need to learn how to recognize what is not good, clear code. And the way you learn that is the hard way. By trying to understand something which is hard to understand, you see, that's not clear code. The way you learn to write good, clear code is by reading lots of code and writing lots of code. But only free software gives you the chance to read the code of large programs that we really use. Then you you've got to write lots of code. You've got to write lots of code for large programs. But when you're starting out writing code for large programs, you've got to start small, which means writing small changes in large programs. That's the only way to learn to tackle the challenges of code for large programs, challenges that don't even appear in small programs. You're not even starting when you're writing small programs. But only free software gives you the chance to write changes in the code of large programs we really use. Any school can offer its students the chance to master the skill of programming if it is a free software school. But there's a deeper reason for moral education and citizenship, because schools must teach the spirit of goodwill, the habit of helping others. Therefore, every class must have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the rest of the class, including the source code in case someone here wants to learn, because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, it's not permitted to bring proprietary software to this class unless it's for reverse engineering practice. The school must set a good example by following its own rule. It must bring only free software to class, except for reverse engineering practice, and then share copies, including the source, with everyone in the class that wants them. If you have a relationship with the school, it's your responsibility to campaign and pressure for the school to move to free software and get rid of proprietary software. You can start by asking the administrators privately, but if that doesn't bring results reasonably soon, you've got to raise the issue publicly and organize more people, teach more people about the issues. Now, maybe they'll say, yes, we'd like to migrate. We'll try a series of tiny pilot programs, and perhaps in a few centuries, we'll finish migrating the school. That's not good enough. They've got to take steps big enough to migrate in a few years, not a few centuries. So if you see that, you know what to say. And if they say, we need to teach students to use the proprietary programs that they will find in business, you could point out that encouraging the forms of dependence present in society contradicts the social mission of the school. The school is supposed to correct them, not perpetuate and deepen them. It's very useful for schools to teach reverse engineering. I recommend that every university have a project class of groups doing projects of reverse engineering of peripherals. And the reason is this is what we need to figure out the commands of those peripherals so that we can write free software to operate them. This is a bottleneck for the advance of free software. We need to do everything possible to prepare more people to do this reverse engineering so that we can figure out how to support the hardware that people have. So, the next threats to our freedom come from websites and other internet services, but most of them are websites nowadays. There are three of them. One is, most websites contain proprietary software that they send to the user. So it's not just that the server is running proprietary software. It may be, but that's bad for the server owner. And I hope the server owner escapes to free software, but that's not hurting the users. But it does hurt the users if the server sends the non-free software to the user's machine. And that's quite common. Many pages contain JavaScript code, and it's typically non-free. Now, since you shouldn't let your machine run non-free software, you should prevent that from running. You can do it by blocking all JavaScript, but nowadays there's a more selective way to do it. We have a program called Libre.js. It's a Firefox add-on that analyzes all the JavaScript code that tries to get into the browser, and just a second. And if it's trivial or free, then it's allowed to run. But if it's non-free and non-trivial, then Libre.js blocks it. And then warns the user. It says, this page tried to install some non-trivial, non-free JavaScript code, and it's been blocked. It does one other thing. It searches heuristically through the site to see how to contact the webmasters, to make it easy for you to send a complaint, easy and quick, because it shows you on the screen how to send a complaint. That means you can send a complaint in 1 minute, and you should. It's really important to send a complaint. The complaint doesn't have to be very detailed. I couldn't use your site because it tried to make me run non-free JavaScript. Please fix this. Non-free software is an injustice. Period. You could send that complaint in 1 minute. You could send 10 complaints a day in 10 minutes. It's very important to do this, because how are we going to convince them to free their JavaScript code? We need to send them lots of complaints. The next threat from websites is abuse of privacy. Well, a lot of websites do surveillance to their visitors. Facebook, for instance, does surveillance even on people that are not users of Facebook. If you visit a page that has a Facebook like button, Facebook knows your computer visited that page, because the image of the like button comes from a Facebook server, and the server has to send it to your computer. And it knows the IP address where it sent this image. And your browser tells it which page the button is for. So it knows that your computer visited that page. Unless you're using our browser, IceCat, which blocks this. And then many websites send data to Google Analytics. They send JavaScript code so that the visitor will inform Google that he's visiting that page. Well, I don't think it's right for sites to give this information to Google. They can analyze the statistics of how people visit the site by running the free software P-week and not violate privacy at all. That's the right way to do it. But anyway, Libre.js will block the Google Analytics JavaScript code. So it protects you from that. But in addition to the surveillance they do, the sites explicitly ask for lots of data. They ask for lots of data about that person. And some say, please let me look at your mail account and collect your entire list of contacts. Which means you're not just giving information about yourself, you're giving information about a lot of other people, which is really mistreating them. So never say yes to that kind of request. And then if you want them to do a service for you, you have to send them lots of data about what you want them to do. And they're collecting all of that. And who are they going to show it to? Well, thanks to Snowden, we know who they're going to show it to. Big Brother. Often this is done for advertising purposes. We've gotten to a paradoxical situation where many websites are funded by advertising. Now, I don't mind seeing an ad. At most, that's a minor annoyance. But if the advertising is based on surveillance, That's much worse than an annoyance. So that's something I really object to. I think we need to establish a system of digital cash for paying a website so that instead of making money by advertising, websites can charge you a little bit of money for a little bit of service. And these are not micropayments. You might call them mini payments. They're much bigger than micropayments, and you will be making them intentionally, but you'd be willing to do it. The crucial thing is it's got to be anonymous. I buy magazines from newsstands. I pay cash. I'd be happy to buy a magazine online if I could anonymously pay cash. I will not identify myself to read them. No way. But I would pay. And then, with a system of digital cash, we could just legally require these sites to stop tracking people, and they could stay in business. They'd charge money. They'd charge you in digital cash. The next threat to our freedom from websites is something most people have never even thought about. And that is, if you use a website to do a computing task of your own, you lose control over that computing. Just as if you did it with a non-free program. It's the same harm. This is known as Service as a Software Substitute, or SAS. And it literally means a service that substitutes for a program you could run by yourself. Because that's when it's bad for you. If the job is your own computing, but it's done by somebody else's server, then you lose control over that computing. And how do you know it's your own computing? Well, could you conceivably do it in your own computer if you had the right program and your computer were powerful enough? Then it's your own computing. That's something you could have control over, so you deserve control over it. You should never allow someone else to take control over that away from you. So, the service takes control of your own computing if it substitutes for a real or hypothetical program. Of course, in order to have control over this computing, you've got to do it with a free program. A non-free program takes away control of this computing. And trusting it to a service also takes away control of this computing. They are two paths to the same harm. If you do the computing with a non-free program, well, it's done in your computer, but you don't control what the non-free program is doing. So you lose control of that computing. If you do it with SAS, then it's done in somebody else's server by programs that you can't see or touch. So you lose control of that computing. Two paths to the same harm. But SAS is actually worse than a non-free program. As I explained, many non-free programs spy on the user. They're spyware, which means that they transmit data about what the user is doing to a server. Well, with SAS, the user has to transmit all the pertinent data to the server, which is going to do the computing. So it's the same result. The user's data, which should be that user's private thing, is in somebody else's server, which will probably show it to Big Brother. But SAS is even worse. I explained how some proprietary programs have a universal backdoor. For instance, Microsoft Windows, or Google Chrome on Windows, or most portable phones. The universal backdoor means that somebody has the power to change how the user's computer is done without asking permission to do so. Well, with SAS, the computing's done in somebody else's server. And the server owner, of course, can change the software that's in the computer, can install different programs to do different things, and thus, and should be free to do that. After all, it's his computer. But when he changes the software load in this computer, that changes how the user's computing is done without asking the user for permission to change it. Thus, SAS is inherently equivalent to running a proprietary program which is spyware and has a universal backdoor. So it's equivalent to proprietary malware. And just as the only way to protect yourself from the harm done by proprietary software is don't run it, the only way to protect yourself from the harm done by SAS is don't use SAS. Now, I went through a long explanation of how to tell when some computing is your own computing. And if you could do it by running a program in your own computer. Well, there are other kinds of computing activities that you couldn't even theoretically do that way because they're joint activities. They involve other people. There's some kind of communication. And those activities you couldn't even theoretically do within your own computer because then you couldn't communicate with the other people. So when the activity is joint, it's not solely yours. And then this issue doesn't arise. You couldn't expect to have full control over all the joint activities you participate in. And why should you? Why should it be you that has the full control over them? So this issue applies to the activities which are yours, not the activities which are joint. And in fact, most of the services servers do have some involve communication somehow. So they don't raise the issue of SAS of the simplest kind. But there's also SAS on behalf of an organization. For instance, an organization that does its text editing in Google Docs is depending on SAS and shouldn't. An organization that has a website and implements the search feature of its website by talking to Google search is using SAS. If you do a search in a search engine, that's not SAS because that's not your own computing. You want to look through somebody's collection of data. That's not an activity of yours. But when an organization wants to implement search through its own website, that's the organization's own computing. And if it leaves that to somebody else's search engine, that organization is losing control of its own computing, which is SAS. So, the next threat to our freedom in the digital society comes from using computers for voting, which you really can't trust. You can't trust computers in voting. And the reason is, computers are so flexible, but it's too easy for somebody to rig the election that way. You just mustn't take the risk. Now, rigging elections has gone on for a long time. But traditional paper voting systems were designed to make it possible. By the way, if you're leaving, you can still buy things now and support the Free Software Foundation. We have a few shirts, a few books, but we also have lots of buttons and gold lapel pins and metallic stickers that say gnu+linux inside. And by buying them, you support our campaigns. Now, I'm a volunteer, but the FSF has paid staff, and we need your support. Now, you can support us also you can just hand donations to me or do it through the website. You can become a member of the FSF. You can do that through the website. If you prefer to pay your annual dues in cash, you could do that with me and fill out a card, and that will make you a member. In other ways to help us are listed at gnu.org/help. Because there are many ways to help. It's not just programming. Anyway, get back to voting. Traditional paper systems are designed so that everybody involved is being monitored by others, except for the voter when voting, because that's supposed to be secret. But everything else that's done by the people involved in the voting place is being checked by others. And the idea is that this way, nobody's in a position to easily commit fraud. And people of ordinary intelligence can understand how the system is supposed to work. They can understand what fraud would look like so that they can be poll watchers. And this is crucial to resisting attempts to rig elections. But once there's a program involved, only experts could even try to check whether it's correct. But even if they do, that's no good. Because suppose a bunch of experts check the program, and a week before the election they say, we've concluded this program is correct. How do you know that the program running during election day is the same that they checked? What if somebody installed a rigged version the morning before the election and put the correct version back that evening? You can't do a recount if all you've got is a set of totals. You must insist that there be a way to do a recount. You can't trust machines that don't give you the papers to do a recount. But what about if the machine prints something and spits it into a bucket, having the user check it first? That's fine if the users check it. But an experiment was done where it wasn't a real election, and they rigged the machines so it would print the wrong things, and most users didn't notice. They weren't really looking. Well, it's not going to do any good if the users don't notice when it's wrong. And what happens when users do notice when it's wrong? Voters in the US reported, the machine keeps trying to tell me I voted for A when I'm trying to vote for B. What happens when they do this? It looks like W stole the election in 2004 with machines to scan and count paper ballots in Ohio. Because some counties count the ballots by hand and some use the machines. And strangely, in the counties that used the machines, there was a systematic discrepancy between the official results and the exit polls. W always gained in the official results. But in the counties that counted by hand, the exit polls matched the official results. It looks like those machines were cheating for W. And it looks like that decided the election for W. So we can't trust computers for recording people's votes. We have to have them in recountable paper. Now, one thing that makes elections special is you can't trust any of the entities involved because you can't verify that they're acting honestly. The company that made the machines could be trying to cheat. The election authority could be trying to cheat. Anybody involved could be trying to cheat, and there's no way to tell. We're not done. I don't know what you're thinking. I'm not close to being finished, I'm sorry. But there are 2 more issues to be covered. Sorry, I'm not ready for questions now. There are 2 more issues, and I don't think I should skip them because they're really important. Well, even stupider is internet voting. Because what happens if you're voting from a zombie machine that's part of a botnet? You'll say, vote for A, and the botnet will send a vote for B. Washington, D.C. decided to experiment with internet voting. So it did a dry run and challenged people to break the security. And lo and behold, people made a fictional robot win the election. But there's another problem with internet voting. Even if the computer system is secure, the larger system is not. What if your boss says, I want you to vote from the computer in my office while I watch, to make sure you vote for my candidate? See, we can't allow that. We must not let that happen. So, no computerized voting. The next threat to our freedom is from the war on sharing. Digital technology is useful because it facilitates copying, manipulating, and transmitting information. There are those that don't want us to get the benefit of digital technology, the copyright industry, which has been attacking the users of digital technology for decades, waging war against us. They started with propaganda, saying that if you share, you're a pirate. Of course, we shouldn't stand for that bullshit. Because piracy is attacking ships, and it's very bad, but sharing is good. So let's not call them both by the same word. So when people ask me what I think of piracy, I say attacking ships is very bad. If they ask me what I think of movie piracy, I say I like the first Pirates of the Caribbean. Why are people all leaving? Did they think the talk was going to be over this soon? The subway keeps running all night. I'm not going to keep doing this all night, but the subway will be there. Anyway, if they had only used propaganda, I wouldn't call it a war, because they have a right to express their views, no matter how disgusting they may seem. No views, no words should be censored. And by the way, I've seen works that I thought were totally disgusting, like the movie Pulp Fiction. That violence just disgusted me. I hope I never see anything like that, but I will defend their right to make such disgusting works. In any case, they didn't stop with propaganda. Then they began perverting our technology, designing it to restrict us with digital handcuffs. And then they started purchasing laws like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to make it illegal to break the digital handcuffs or tell other people how. And then they started suing teenagers for hundreds of thousands of dollars for sharing. And then they started purchasing laws in various countries to abolish a basic principle of justice. No punishment without a fair trial. There are laws in various countries that will fine people or disconnect them from the internet if they are merely accused of sharing. But that didn't work well enough. So in Japan, they have imposed 2 years in prison as a penalty for downloading something without authorization from the net. And if that doesn't work, I suppose they'll start executing people for sharing. Because I don't think they will tolerate any limits in how far they go to defend their power to squeeze money out of people. But it's no coincidence that they keep proposing nastier and nastier measures. You see, sharing is good. And with digital technology, sharing is easy. so people share. And the only way to stop people from sharing is by bullying them. So it's not just the measures that are evil, it's the goal that's evil. We have to end the war on sharing by legalizing sharing. We have to clearly and finally put an end to this oppressive attack. But when they purchase these laws and demand additional power over us, they always do it by saying that it's for the artists. They say that if we share, we're stealing from the artists. That's ridiculous. They steal everything from the artists. What could there be left for us to steal if we wanted to? Anyway, copying is not theft. Copying is copying. Theft is taking something away from someone. Copying is making one more. I hope you'll all see Nina Paley's brilliant 1-minute video. Copying is not theft. In any case, there is, and it's true that the existing copyright system is designed mainly to support these businesses, and only a little bit of trickle-down reaches most of the artists, except for the stars, but the stars will be rich anyway. But there is a little bit of truth in the point that if we want arts, we've got to support the artists somehow. But that doesn't mean letting the copyright industry cruelly enforce the existing system, which doesn't help the artists much anyway. I want to propose 2 new ways to support artists which are compatible with legalizing sharing. If we use either of these systems, all the artists will say, please share my work. So, one system is administered by the state. The state would have a certain amount of money each year to distribute among the artists based on their popularity. Why based on popularity? Well, that's what the copyright system does. I'm just being conservative. But the question is, how do you divide it up? Well, you measure the popularity somehow because you don't want to surveil everybody. That's unjust. But you could do sampling, you could have polls of what you like. You could count the amount of sharing in peer-to-peer networks, because that's public. So you get a popularity figure for each artist, then how much does the artist get? The obvious way is linear proportion. If you're twice as popular, you get twice as much money. If you're 1,000 times as popular, you get 1,000 times as much money. But that gives bad results. Because if star A is 1,000 times as popular as non-star, appreciated, capable artist B, then A would get 1,000 times as much money as B. Which means in order for B to get enough to live on, we'd have to make A super rich, which is wasting our money. And most of the money would go to a few stars. The system would be very inefficient at supporting the artists who really need help. So my proposal is take the cube root of the popularity figure and give out the money in proportion to the cube roots. The cube root of 1,000 is 10. So if A is 1,000 times as popular as B, with the cube root, A will get 10 times as much money as B. Not 1,000 times, just 10 times. The effect of the cube root is to transfer most of the money from the stars to the mid-range popularity artists. Each star will still get more than a non-star, but there are lots of non-stars. So most of the money will go to non-stars. Each star will get more, but not astronomically more. Not 1,000 times more. So we'll end up with a system that's efficient for helping the artists where it really does good for the arts. The artists who are appreciated enough that we want them to be able to quit their day jobs. The other method is with voluntary payments. Now, voluntary payments work pretty well already to support artists. There are artists that say, here's my work, pay if you wish. and there's crowdfunding. And they work pretty well, like the Humble ebook bundle. A year and a half ago, 13 science fiction writers released this and said, pay us if you wish. They got $1 million in a month. It was like being in the New York Times bestseller list. And then there are others who have a website and just all the time say, please download, pay for things if you wish, and they make a living. Of course, they have to ask for not mini payments. They have to ask for more, like they might ask for $50 or $100, or if you give them $1,000, they might go on a date with you. I mean, who knows? If you give them $50, they'll send you the fancy CD case. And then crowdfunding works pretty well. So voluntary payments are already working. But why didn't you give, say, 50 cents to some artist after you listened to or watched something? Well, because it's too hard. Unless they're playing right there and you can give them physical cash, it's too hard to give them a little bit of money. So I propose, let's establish a system where we do this, where every time you play your work, you can push a button and it will send 50 cents to the artist. And you can do it if you like or not. But if you do it, you'll feel good. So people will start doing it. And I bet each of you could afford to send 50 cents every day, and you wouldn't miss the money involved. The only reason you don't do it is it's too much hassle. So I'm saying, let's get rid of the hassle. There are people who couldn't afford to give 50 cents every day. There are poor people, and thanks to right-wing policies and trying to balance the budget, there are more and more poor people all the time in the U.S. And they won't ever send any money, which is good. They shouldn't have to send any money to artists. But there are enough non-poor still that the artists will get their money. They'll get what they need. And if we want people to give more often, we can have friendly commercials. Did you send 50 cents to an artist today? Why not? You'll see how good it feels to give. Push the button. And people will do it, and they'll feel good, and they'll do it again. Contrast that with the cruel and vicious propaganda of the war on sharing, and you'll see why this is so much better. Now, there are ways to combine these systems. There are lots of variants. We can make it work whatever way seems best. And I'm not against other government systems to support the arts, but they're not replacements for the copyright system. They're good in their own way. So, and of course, I'm not proposing to stop artists from selling copies or selling tickets. That's fine. I don't want to get rid of those ways of making money. I'm proposing added systems to support artists more. Now, one of these nasty systems to punish people for sharing was set up in the U.S. But in the U.S., it would be unconstitutional to punish internet users legally based on accusation. So Obama organized a private deal between the 5 major ISPs and the copyright industry, where the ISPs agreed to punish their own customers privately when they're accused of sharing. And they could do this because those customers have no rights. We saw what this means when the US government tried to kick WikiLeaks off the network. Not by prosecution, because apparently WikiLeaks hadn't committed any crimes. There was no prosecution to be made. But instead, the US started intimidating the services that WikiLeaks depended on to operate in the network. Now, if you have some views and you want to convey them to other people in the physical world, you can write them on a sign, and you can walk around on the street carrying a sign. You have a right to do this, and you don't need any companies to help you do this. But if you want to do the same thing in the internet, you need the help of an ISP and a hosting company and a domain registrar. And they can cut you off more or less arbitrarily, because you have no rights in the virtual world. It's as if you couldn't get from your house to the street without crossing some company's land, and that company could forbid you to get to the street. And suppose you want to collect money. Well, on the street you can carry a can, and people could put anonymous cash into that box. And by the way, it's very important to pay with cash. Resist surveillance. But on the internet, you need a payment company. Well, now there's Bitcoin, which is better because the payment companies can't stop you. But it's still not anonymous. So the US government attacked WikiLeaks, attacking all the services it depended on, and that showed us that all freedom, all activities that we do on the net are vulnerable. So we need to establish principles that the services that are needed for usual kinds of activity on the net cannot be cut off without going to court. So it should be like renting an apartment. If you sign a lease, the landlord can't kick you out, except by going to court and proving that you deserve to be kicked out. It should be the same with your ISP. It should be the same with your hosting company, the same with your domain name registrar, the same with the payment company. They should not be able to kick you out without proving that there's a valid reason to do so. And the legitimate reason should be specified explicitly by law. We need to have rights in the virtual world just as we have rights in the physical world. Now it's time for the auction. I'm going to auction this adorable GNU for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. Because this adorable GNU needs a home. And if you've got a penguin at home, you need a GNU for your penguin. Because, as we all know, a penguin can't hardly function without a GNU. So if you buy it, I'll be happy to sign the card for you. We can accept payment with checks, or credit cards, or cash. When you bid, please wave your arm and shout the amount as loud as you can so I can hear you. And I'm going to start with its usual price of $25. Do I get 25 or more? Do I get 20? How much? I've got 25. Do I get 30?
You accept Bitcoin?
We can accept Bitcoin, but you've got to bid in dollars because you've got to be comparable with others. Do I get 30 or more?
30.
Who's?
30.
Are you?
Yes.
I got 30. Do I get 35?
35.
Who's saying 35? I've got 40. Do I get 45?
50 over here.
Who? 50. Wave your arm. I've got 50. Do I get 55? I've got 100. Do I get 110? I've got 100. Do I get 110? Do I get 110 for this adorable GNU?
110.
Who? 110? I got 110. Do I get 120? I got 110. Do I get 120 for this adorable GNU that needs a home? Do I get 120 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom? Who? I got 150. Do I get 160? I got 150. Do I get 160? Do I get 160 for this adorable?
160.
160. Do I get 170? Do I get 170? I got 160. Do I get 170 for this adorable? Do I get 170 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom? I got 200. Do I get 220? I got 200. Do I get 220 or more for this adorable GNU to defend freedom? Do I get 220 or more? Who? 300. Are you serious? Okay, I got 300. Do I get 330? Do I get 330 or more for this adorable GNU? Do I get 330 or more to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom? Do I get 330 or more? Last chance. Last. I got 400. Wow. Do I get 450? 450 or more for this adorable GNU? 450 or more to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Last chance to bid 450 or more. Last chance to bid 450 or more. Going. Gone for 400. So, please come up. How do you wish to pay? Okay. Yes, you can go to the wet machine. So, because I'll be here answering questions. There'll be time. Okay. So now it's time for questions. Please line up at these microphones to ask questions.
Sir, what do you see as the next, besides fashion?
I can't hear the words you're saying.
Sir, what do you see the next social political establishment of our planet besides fashion?
Besides what?
Fashion.
Besides what?
Fashion. Fashion. We're in fashion. It's global fashion.
Or besides fascism?
Yes.
Well, I can't see the future. What I see is only the present. I see that we have a plutocratic government instead of a democratic government. Democracy does not mean that we have elections. Elections are the mechanism of democracy. But democracy means that the many non-rich get together to be stronger than the rich and to prevent the rich from having influence comparable to their wealth. That's not working anymore. The rich have taken control, and so of course the rest are suffering. We've got to restore democracy. I don't know how. I try to help in various ways, and many others are trying also.
Did not work in Greece, republicanism didn't work in Iran.
I know. Well, what can I do? If I had an answer to this one, I'd be the savior of the world. If I knew how, I would do it.
Hi, thanks for your words here tonight. They are very inspirational. The first time I'm listening to you in live theater. And I had two questions. They're a little bit general. I don't know if you already...
Please, no apologies. Get straight to the point.
Okay. My first question is, in the things that you explained, there is a little bit of a contradiction in my opinion, and I would love to hear...
If you could get straight to the point.
So on one side, you are defending a strong state that will regulate certain things like what you can install on your devices, how you can use your devices, and how the companies will let the user.
No, not how you can use your devices, but yes, how companies make them so that they are to ban certain oppressive practices that turn your digital devices into systems for them to mistreat you.
Okay, and on the other hand, you also cannot defend that states shouldn't be as strong as to control what we do. And my question is...
No, the state should respect people's freedom.
Right.
I don't want a weak state. I want a state restrained by democracy and human rights.
Anyway, my question is, who should put the balance and who should put the lines into what the state should do and should not do?
Well, this is a hard problem because no mechanism that people have ever thought of is guaranteed to give the right results. We can have a good constitution and then they can figure out, the NSA work out this complicated mechanism where neither the FISA court nor Congress could effectively control the NSA, and it's trashing the Constitution. You got right-wing Supreme Court justices that say that corporations have human rights, which is twisted. I don't have a recipe. I don't know how to solve this. I know what the solution more or less should look like, but I don't know how to get it. What can I say?
Okay, and my second question, just straight to the point, how can it make compatible working in free software with paying the bills?
Well, first of all, because non-free software is an injustice, it is not excusable. It can never be justified to work on non-free software. That's no better than being a thief, or a corrupt politician, or the kinds of businesses that trick people into letting them poison us and so on. So there are people who make money from working on free software. For instance, developing software for clients. You can you can develop a program and hand it to the client as free software. This is respecting the client's freedom, but the client will have to pay you to do the work. This business is not just hypothetical. There are thousands of people practicing it now. But there's also crowdfunding for doing programs that are of appeal to a large number of people. That's where crowdfunding can work. So it's not impossible for you to get a job doing free software, but you may not find one. And what happens then? Well, since non-free software is unethical, and if you need a job, you'll have to get some other kind of job. And maybe it's not a software job at all. Maybe you can only write some free software in your spare time. It would be nice then if you could do free software more of the time, but it's better to do something that's ethical to make money and then do free software in your spare time. It's better to do a little of something good than a lot of something vicious. And of course, in the US today, there's no reason to believe you can find a job at all. Because the right-wingers are running the economy to kick people out of work. Another law I suggest is to prohibit the automatic sales machines in stores. Because they threaten to put hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of Americans out of work. We can't allow that. We don't need more efficiency in this country. We've got plenty of efficiency. The productivity per hour of work has gone up tremendously in the past few decades, and all the benefits gone to the plutocrats Workers have not got the benefit. Well, it's time to give everybody a decent life. Either we've got to give everybody work, or we've got to give people a decent life without working. But you can't solve this problem by hiring people to develop proprietary software, because most of the people out of work are not programmers and have no skill in that direction. You can't think of proprietary software as something that can solve the problem of unemployment in the U.S. It couldn't possibly solve it, aside from involving mistreatment of the people who use the software.
Thank you.
And ultimately, if many jobs are automated in the next couple of decades, we will simply have to provide people with a decent life without working. As I heard a wise man say, if the robots make it, we've got to take it. Next.
You described a solution to not using advertisements or other methods of revenue on the web. Like mini transaction, you said, doesn't that hurt open access?
Not necessarily. First of all, I don't use the term open access because I don't like the word open. It's the wrong concept. And in this particular case, that has caused a great problem. You see, when around 10 years ago, when there was first was a campaign for, quote, open access, unquote, the most important point was to allow the freedom to redistribute and repurpose articles. So in fact, it was a campaign for free publication. But because they called it open, people mostly forgot about that point. So the badly chosen term changed the semantics. And it became a weaker campaign only for the original publication site to allow everybody to download. I concluded, therefore, we have to campaign for free scientific publishing. But note that this is about scientific publishing, not all websites that might do any kind of service for you. It's one very specific area. And the archive seems to be able to do free scientific publishing without advertisements.
And what's the solution under the mini transaction system for those who can't afford it?
Sorry, I don't understand. The archive,
Not
archive.org doesn't charge anything.
Not necessarily for the archive.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about?
Misunderstood, but you said something about using mini transactions to fund websites.
Yes, there are lots of websites that are funded by advertising now, and they do various kinds of services. But if we had this, if we could easily make digital cash anonymous payments to them, then they could charge us instead.
So you're saying that those websites just would not be able to be accessed by people who would not be able to afford it?
Yes, but it doesn't cost much. You know, people go around buying lots of things in stores.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Christoph, and I'm a
You do what?
What is your opinion about data collection for the purposes of improving patient care?
Well, that's a hard case. On the one hand, collecting data about medical cases is useful for finding out what treatments work or don't work in which kinds of patients. On the other hand, it's very dangerous. There's a lot of surveillance now in our medical system. And I resent the fact that my prescriptions are being sent to a centralized database. Of course, that's part of the war on painkillers, which has other much worse effects on people who are in pain, because doctors don't dare prescribe them as much painkillers as they need. They've got to shortchange them on painkillers, or they'll be accused of catering to drug habits. So they make people suffer instead. Well, in that one case, I don't see a really good solution, but I do see something that can make things less bad than it's likely to be. And that is, you shouldn't let any companies get any of this data.
So how do you give this data to, say, your doctor? How, myself as the company, how can I go ahead and give this to your doctor, your hospital?
Sorry, the data would be used by researchers, not by doctors. The researchers might come to conclusions about treatments, and that's not personal data. That data would be useful to doctors, and I suppose it would be published as scientific research. The problem comes in doing the research based on data about lots of persons. And the first point is that should go to university researchers. It should never go to any companies. The research should not be done by anyone with a profit interest.
So I'm still going to ask you about this because for personalized medicine, for end health, mobile health, what would you see as the least harmful way of doing that?
Wait, are we talking about the same thing? You were very vague, and I'm starting to think we're not talking about the same thing at all.
I'm talking about...
You made me guess what the issue was. Maybe I guessed wrong.
I'm talking about in respect of biometrics and physiological monitoring of your own body for the purpose
Well, all that physiological monitoring should be done by devices that belong to me, the patient, and it should be available to my computer, and it should be up to me whether to make that available to anybody else.
Okay, thank you.
It should be available in documented formats that can be worked on with free software. And then if I want to give some of that data to my doctor, I can. Oh, time to buy the canoe. Thank you. I'll sign it after we're done. First, I want to answer the questions. I'll sign it, but after the questions are done. Because basically, I'd rather not make everybody wait for one person. I'd rather make one person wait for everybody. That seems better for everyone. So,
I'm curious about how you've seen the level of popular interest in free software change in the last 5 or 10 years.
I don't necessarily know,
Okay.
unfortunately. To measure that would be a kind of research activity, which I don't do. I'm not even trained in it.
Hey, my name is Bakari Pace. I went to school at Morehouse and I studied philosophy while I was there. I came up and I started studying at Columbia Law School. I took a class with Evan Moglen called Law in Contemporary Society. And there he basically introduced me to software as a revolutionary activity, that you could actually, try to change things through software. And as a result, I started to go into programming and learning about programming. Now, I'm 24. I didn't have like 10 years of experience inside of this, but I want to be involved in software in a way that does positive work and does actually build in a positive way. But I'm not sure how to do that.
Here's things other than programming. If you are becoming a lawyer, you could help our movement a lot by doing law. Look at gnu.org/help and you'll see several different kinds of work that you could do to help us. We don't mention law because the number of people who might conceive. No, most people who look at that page are not lawyers. That's something very few people might do, so I didn't put it in that page, I think. But you could do that. If you could volunteer some of your time once you're a lawyer, that would be really, volunteer some of your time to free software organizations. For instance, sometimes we have to take legal action against companies that are violating free software licenses. You see, there are two kinds of free software licenses. There are the copyleft licenses, and there are the non-copyleft licenses, which we sometimes call pushover licenses. The pushover licenses say they allow people to make modified proprietary versions. The copyleft licenses say you can't do that. You can distribute modified versions, of course, that's freedom free, but they have to be free in the same way. So there are companies that violate these. We have to take legal action against them.
I'm still interested in actually learning how to program and learning how to use.
Well, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, but I want to get a sense
programmer,
of what
then you could help.
I'm trying to get a sense of like where I would fit in as a guy who's
I
just
don't know.
off the
Basically, our community doesn't care where you came from. If you can do the work of contributing improvements to free programs, the developers will thank you for it. But you might be able to contribute a lot more as a lawyer than as a programmer. We have a lot more programmers than we have lawyers. Offering us lawyer talent, you could be tremendously a contributor. Whereas being another programmer, maybe you could be one more on top of thousands. Sure, we can always use more. Also, if you become good at explaining the ideas, you could contribute by doing that.
Can you talk more about that?
Well, you've seen me do it, okay? But one person's not enough. If you could do this, that would be a great contribution.
That's actually what I've been doing recently. I've been writing my first book and doing speeches on that. But it's been difficult to find the people who are talking and using the language in a way. Like for instance, today, the conversation you had about the difference between free software and open source. Was brand new to me. I've always heard of people, especially within like the revolutionary side of the world, talking about, oh yeah, open source, but they're using it as a way to
The
hide.
funny thing is that those people are promoting the right-wing, corporate-friendly co-optation campaign. It's ironic, they don't know that.
Yeah, but they think of it as a positive. They think of, oh, if I can
I
say it this
know.
way, yeah.
Yeah, but what partly it is that the open source people didn't completely succeed in excluding our ideals. Our ideals seep in to some extent, but partly those people, they would really love to support free software, but they never heard of free software because the open source people blocked us out. So if you tell them about free software, they'll become free software supporters, I think.
I agree.
And then it'll help us a tremendous amount.
Are there other names or organizations outside of the Software Freedom Law Center, Free Software Foundation that I should be knowing?
Those are the organizations in the U.S.
Okay.
that you should know about. But take a look at gnu.org/philosophy, because there's a lot in there that you'll find interesting.
Thank you.
Doctor, let me start. I know you mentioned a little bit about the Bitcoins, and I just want to know exactly how you feel when you use Bitcoins. If
I
there is a
don't
website,
use Bitcoin
do
myself.
you buy your magazine with a Bitcoin? Or?
Because it's not anonymous. Now, there are people who are trying to make an anonymous add-on to Bitcoin, and that might make it do what I think we need. However, the Free Software Foundation accepts donations in Bitcoin, and we're working on being able to accept Bitcoin for purchases. All we need is something that will be able to tell you what the price is in Bitcoin right now, because our prices are all in dollars. Once we have something that can compute the price in Bitcoin, then we could accept payments for purchases in Bitcoin.
Also, just wanted to do a quick side note, but it's like 7 days from now, it will be 154 years. The Abraham Lincoln was there exactly where you are, and he was advocating to abolish slavery and freedom. And 154 years later, you hear advocating for digital freedom in a way. And right 155 years, Peter Cooper started a school for free education. And today, that, they don't want to give anyone free education.
Yeah, I read about that.
So I just wanna-
protests and
So I just want to tell the people here, keep on fighting for
Yeah.
free education.
the state of Oregon has adopted a plan to pay for college education with a fraction of your subsequent earnings. So if you make a lot, then you pay a lot, and if you don't find a job in your field, then you won't pay much. But the point is, that more or less fixes the horrible problem with college education in the U.S. today.
Thank you.
So I am a programmer, and I agree with your aims, but I choose to work towards them primarily with technical means rather than political means. And I know that I need to say free instead of open, and I should not call it GNU.
Well, I mean, you can say free software and open source are different political positions. You're free to support either one. That's,
Right, so I support free software, but I'm wondering if there's any other ways that I might be unintentionally harming the political movement.
Well, if you're promoting the use of non-free programs, you're hurting people.
Not doing that.
What?
I'm not doing that.
Oh, good. Well, if you talk about the GNU system and call it Linux, you're also blocking people's view of the free software movement, so I hope you don't do that.
Right.
And other than that, I don't see any. I mean, you can work more or less to spread the ideas, and I hope you'll do more. Do take a look at gnu.org/help, because it will suggest positive things you can do. And you might want to do something.
Hi, my name is Kevin Chen. I'm a computer science student. Recently, we've seen, people are putting microcontrollers in everything. For example, we're starting to see Bluetooth antennas that come with, reasonably powerful ARM microcontrollers, and obviously running proprietary software that's loaded at the factory. So since this software requires, pretty specific knowledge of the chip and the implementation, do you have any thoughts on how we can provide free implementations of it?
Okay. First of all, there are two different issues at stake here. If something has a processor and a program, but it's not its purpose to be a computer, and people don't normally ever change the software in it, then we could ignore the fact that there is a processor and a program there. We could treat it as circuits. However, if it's connected to any sort of network or a computer, it might be a terrible security threat. People agree. Nowadays, USB memories have a processor and a program that can be written, at least some of them. Hard disks have a processor program that can be written. And people have found ways to use those to stick malware into devices. This design practice has become so dangerous, we can't let it continue.
So the solution is by designing hardware that doesn't require.
Or else has a ROM.
Got it.
A literal ROM, so that there's no way to write a program into it, no way that anyone can change the program in that. Not the manufacturer and not anyone else who gets access.
Thank you.
I mean, it may have seemed like a good engineering practice because it was cheap, but that was without thinking about the danger of it.
Thank you.
Hello, Richard. Welcome to my alma mater. I'm Paul Garrett. We met a few years ago through Marcy Gordon, who came to my computer lab on 4th and Lafayette Street. I'm the founder of Name.Space, and I'm sure you're aware of the ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Well, we're currently in a universally unique position of actually taking back some of the liberties that the corporate insiders that control the domain system are stealing right now from us, who originated hundreds of top-level domains since the 90s. We have ICANN in federal court now in California on antitrust grounds, and at issue are several hundred top-level domains
Okay,
that we determined.
let me respond.
Yeah.
I mostly think that the domain name issues are secondary. The main danger I see in regard to domain names is the U.S. practice of seizing them and destroying them, which is not ICANN.
Well, can I speak to a couple of issues? First of all, when a lot of times when the internet is shut down or when sites are blocked, besides the seizing of domains, that's one way the traffic flows, and that's one way that the traffic is stopped. And I'll give you an example. During the uprising in Egypt last year, when they shut down the internet, they were rerouting the domains. And interestingly, ICANN recently hired Tarek Kamal, who was the IT person in Egypt who shut down the internet. So he now works for ICANN. The other thing is too is when we're talking about liberty and public good with respect to digital infrastructure, what determines the future has to do with who owns and who operates that infrastructure. And
Yeah, but I think,
and so wait, can I just finish my point?
Well,
So the ICANN and their big companies are making millions and millions of dollars, but they're not giving back. There's no public good that's coming out of that.
maybe so. But I think you have seen the argument that the new top-level domains are just a way of making a lot of companies pay a lot of money for their own names inside these new top-level domains. But I don't care about that much.
But that's not the issue that I'm raising. That's not the issue that I'm actually raising. The issue.
Well, why don't you get straight to the real point, okay?
Yes. Okay. The real point is that the large companies have control over all these resources. Whatever policies they're doing to extort corporations.
Okay, but what is the real issue for human rights here?
Digital freedom.
Sorry,
Digital freedom.
that's general.
Okay, and more concretely is the ability to have the economic power through this industry, through this economy, to build, own, and operate our own network infrastructure that we can determine the policies with respect to access, net neutrality, software freedom, etc. And also to establish, because domains are something people pay for, to establish a public good, for example, to establish the public libraries as registrars, so that the source of their revenue.
That might be a good thing. I mean, as I've said, I don't see a lot of problem in the domain name system now, except the danger that your domain name will get shut off on you because the powers that we don't like what you're doing. And therefore, I think that the other domain name issues are not high priority issues, and that's all I have to say.
But in terms of running critical infrastructure, domain registries are critical infrastructure that allow internet traffic to flow or not.
Yeah.
And in this case, in our case, should we prevail against the ICANN? And I guess I'm asking people to be aware of this and for your support. Because, okay,
I can't give you my support now, because I don't know what you're doing.
Just to get the message out that we're in this position right now, we're suing ICANN, and the stakes are whether or not Google and Amazon will control the destiny of the critical infrastructure of the internet or not. And
I don't particularly want them to control things.
exactly.
On the other hand, there's also the plan to try to give the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, control over the internet instead of the U.S. government, and that would make things much worse.
This has been going on since the 90s, I can remember, because that was all part of
Anyway,
it.
next question.
Anyway, thank you very much. I'm glad you're here.
Hi, Dr. Stallman. I was just wondering, because of your public support of whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, along with recently being photographed with Julian Assange, I was just wondering whether or not you've noticed any increase in, say, harassment by border patrol?
No, I have not.
Okay, thank you very much.
In my humble opinion, I think the one primary problem for free software adoption these days seems to be hardware. Software has become free, it's become usable. I've been using it as my primary daily driver.
You're right. Okay, can you get to your point?
I mean, what can we do to enforce?
Reverse engineering is the first step. The next thing is totally reject tyrant and jail products. A tyrant product is one that doesn't allow users to put in a different operating system. A jail is one that doesn't allow users to freely install applications.
Can't we convince others to do the same? Like, there are people
You've heard how I present my views. This is my best idea of how to do it. You can look at speeches from 5 years ago and see different ways that I used then. You can look at my articles in gnu.org and then think of your own ways. I have nothing to offer that I don't do.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Candida. I first thank you for being here and for the work that you've been doing. I'm relieved to know that free software exists the way that you're describing it, because I have been concerned about what you mentioned earlier, the fact that workers and just people in general are more productive now, but all of the benefits of that seem to be stuck at the top, and that's happening more. So my question in that context is, this event is sponsored in part by New York Tech Meetup. I realize we're also at Cooper Union, but most of the people that I know who are creating software in New York are not creating free software.
That's
so
true.
my question, which may be a little bit out of left field, is how did you get here?
Look, when people invite me to speak and I see that there's a chance to have a good audience, I don't say, are you good enough? Now, there are some exceptions. I would not speak sponsored by a proprietary software company. So, for instance, if Microsoft were holding an event and wanted me to speak at it, I would say no. A public event. Now, if Microsoft wanted me to speak to its employees, I would say yes. If I thought there was enough chance they would listen to me and make it worth the time, but I wouldn't reject it out of hand. But I would reject speaking on their platform to the public because it would be endorsing them. But the organizations that are endorsing this talk, I'm not particularly against, so I have no reason to say no.
At the fundamental level, I understand that you believe that privacy is a right, a single bit. And you're also talking about distributed network online, so digital money. I'd like you to explain to me how you can actually separate identity from money. So
Okay.
you can actually transfer cash anonymously.
David Chow in the 1980s invented a system of digital signatures where a bank can sign a number as being valid digital cash, but the bank can't tell what number it's signing. So later, so the user does this and thus gets bank validated digital cash. But when this user spends it, say, by handing it to some website, the website can then prove to its bank this is valid digital cash and get money for it. But none of them can work out which user paid that digital cash to the website.
Except that they can track identities using IP addresses and...
Well, if they can, but if the user is anonymous aside from that, then the cache doesn't reveal who the user is.
Okay. So, to me that sounds like at some point you have to trust someone. You're connected to the internet somehow. You've got to be...
Well, if you're connected to a library and no one knows who you are, then you don't have to.
But other than that, so if you're using a personal computer with an IP
Right, which
address,
maybe you shouldn't. I don't identify myself to websites almost ever, and I won't browse from my own computer. I browse from computers that others are letting me use temporarily.
Hi. Hi, I'm Jackie, and my questions are pertaining more to hardware. Software?
Sorry, your question's what?
Are pertaining more to hardware. Right, so KDE has this Rebelli tablet project, which is more or less like a fully open and
I'm afraid I couldn't hear all the words you said. Speak more slowly, please. I'm hard of hearing.
Sorry. So KDE, the open source tool, they're more free software. They're more actually, no, they claim to be both, they champion
Doesn't
service.
matter. You can say free software here. If you want to talk to me, you better.
Well, they have an initiative which is actually getting a lot of steam in Europe, but not so much in America, the Rebelli tablet project, which is more or less what you're...
The what project?
Rebelli. It's, I think it's a German word, I'm not too sure.
I don't know. Why not get straight to the point?
That's
It doesn't matter what KDE's doing.
That they're the only people pushing behind, like, mainly the aspect of building hardware that works sometimes with software that's more free, like, not necessarily constrained to things we're saying.
So maybe that's a good thing. I don't know any details, so I can't say much.
Getting to that, what more do you feel like has to be done in the hardware aspect of things? I mean,
Well, I don't know what they're doing, so I can't tell you what more. I don't know it. I've never heard of this project before. But I can tell you that the biggest problem we face now is that the systems on a chip, which have secret video processing units and secret graphics processing units, and we have to do reverse engineering to figure out how to run them.
well, the entire aspect of the project, and it's actually shifting so it's to eliminate that guesswork per se. Like
Maybe it's good until I see the details. I can't judge it.
the information's fully available online.
I don't know what, I can't find things. If you send me specific stuff, I couldn't hear what name you said. I can't find anything. I don't have time to search for anything. I never do. But if I heard the name, I could ask someone else to investigate.
Rebelli, Vivalidi.
I don't understand that. Why don't you write it down?
Sure. Okay, I'll bring it up.
I saw the X60 laptop on your website.
I'm afraid I can't hear the consonants you say.
The X60 laptop on your website. It's made by Lenovo.
I can't hear you very well. I cannot hear the words you say. Your way of pronouncing certain letters does not come across to me.
Okay, I saw a laptop on your website. The laptop name is X60.
Yes, it's the glove laptop.
Yeah. So I wanted to buy one laptop from.
I can't hear you now.
I wanted to buy a laptop.
Go ahead.
Is it recommended that I buy?
Yes.
60?
Those are the products that we can recommend based on their working with free software. Based on other things, it's not our job to judge. In other aspects, we don't judge, but we certify them that all the software they come with is free.
Dr. Stallman, thank you for your 30 years of contribution to the
I can't hear your words.
Thank you for your contribution to the evolution of computing in the last 30 years.
Well,
My
actually,
question
that's
is,
not what I was trying to do.
but it is, whether you like it or not.
Well, no, that's not what I was trying to do.
Okay.
I'm trying to give people freedom. And if I have any effect on the evolution of computing, that's a byproduct.
No, that's good. It's true. So my question is actually not related to that. It's about digital currency, and I just there are a few comments about
I'm
it.
afraid now I can't hear you. You
Okay.
speed it up.
Okay, I slow down. My question is about digital currency. Now, in the context of economics, GDP is equal imports, export, investments, and a few other things. Now, if a country cannot log or track the transactions that businesses are conducting, which is the case as of today, it may change tomorrow with Bitcoin, you're not contributing to your economy. Your country is going down. In that sense.
Well, actually, I would disagree.
Okay,
That's a matter of the measurements. But what really is causing companies not to contribute to economy is the offshoring of their profits, which they do using many legal dodges, such as by claiming that all the profits are made in this other country, in a place where they have a virtual office, and that country doesn't tax them, and many, many bizarre things like that. So I call for putting an end to that. Now, Bitcoin can be used for underground transactions,
money laundering as well.
but I don't think it can be used very much by above-ground businesses to hide what they're doing. But what these businesses do use is what's really the problem.
Thank you for your time.
Have you ever read the source code of the Libo-Elu spook program?
So of the what?
Libo-Elu spook program, the laptop you use.
No, I haven't.
Then how do you know it is free of malicious features?
I don't, but you see, this is an interesting point. With a free program, there's a community of users, some of whom read its source code for various reasons.
But do you have any confirmation that say the
No, I don't. But I know that a community like this is more trustworthy than a single entity.
Okay, and will you be signing things later?
What?
Will you be signing things later?
Yeah, I mean, if there are any books or shirts or saying we sign now, I'll sign them.
Thank you.
In fact, it's time for me to say I'm done because it's getting late. So I won't answer more questions, I'm sorry. But this is enough. I'm tired now.